So here we are for our second keynote, and we're still thinking about this value of being Christ-centered in messy church, about how do we keep Christ at the center. And one of the ways that this works is it comes down to the question that a lot of messy church leaders and teams ask, which is, how do we talk about God? How do we talk about Jesus in messy church? Because we're so busy sticking googly eyes on things and turning pipe cleaners into things and building things and blowing things up that we're explaining that, and there's thousands of families coming to our table and we can't actually do anything apart from just dish out the activities to people. So how do we talk about God in messy church? So we're going to be approaching this from different directions, but Martin's going to kick us off with a bit of a story.
We arrived in Canada on Monday. I think that's right, isn't it? But it was an overnight flight, so we were pretty tired and zombie-like for most of Monday and sleeping eventually in the afternoon. But on Tuesday, we went walking around Toronto and exploring and discovering all sorts of things. And some bits we enjoyed and some bits we got lost in. Some bits were surprises, and we met other people who were tourists. Walking is a good thing. You meet lots of people walking. You see a lot more walking. And our story is about walking. Now, I know you just had a meal, but I'd like you to get into this story. So would you put your pads and papers to one side for the moment? And if you are able and willing, or please be willing, can you stand up where you are and just stretch a bit, after you're talking and you're eating and whatever. And we want to get into, there's a real stretch going on over there. Oh, very good, lots of stretch. This is Zumba now, goodness gracious. Okay. And we want to get, now there's lots of ways. We noticed, Lucy and I, as we walked around, there was some very intentional, purposeful walking going on in Toronto. I don't know whether it's true always, but they were on a mission. They were getting down to the offices on time or to the university lecture on time. So purposeful walking. Can you do on the spot some purposeful walking? It involves, probably your arms moving as well. And slightly, they were very polite as they tapped me on the shoulder and got me out of the way so I could go on. And we were dawdling, to be honest. But purposeful walking, very good. There's all sorts. Walking is good, very good. It's very energizing. But actually, Lucy and I weren't quite up to purposeful walking. We were tourists. We were looking around. So some slow looking around walking. How about this, yeah? The arms aren't moving so much. Looking around, enjoying the view. We bumped into a few things by mistake. We bumped into each other. Oh, look, there's the CNN Tower. Oh, very nice, very exciting. We looked up there for a bit. That was very good. We got down to the water side. That was very interesting as well. And we had all sorts of walking experiences. That's very good. Now, those of you, I've just become a grandpa, as it happens. And so I went walking with our Isaac. He's our grandchild. And that sort of walking is a different sort of walking again, isn't it? He now can walk, but it's all over the place. So can you do this bit of meandering walking, trying to keep up, and then fast, then slow? Oh, goodness, they're going everywhere now. A lot of meandering going on, and keeping your eye on what's happening. This walking is confusing and messy, but it is walking. It's walking alongside someone. I walked around Toronto with Lucy, walking around with Isaac. We saw things, then he zoomed on. Walking in relationship is a very special sort of walking. I know you have individual lone walking as well. Sometimes, just to get the heart beating now, you need to get somewhere really fast. On the count of 3. This is some speed walking. Go! Oh, this is speed walking. Oh, I'm waking them up, Lucy. I'm waking them up. Oh, very good. Okay. Enough before we have too many heartbeats or whatever. Yeah. So lots of walking. And one last sort of walking gets us into our story, which has everything to do with, I think, understanding how we meet with God in messy church. It's a powerful story that Luke tells us, and it's some quite slow, sad walking. You might have your head down. You might be thoughtful, reflective, worried. But you're doing it with someone. So if you dare, just shuffle up close to someone nearby, because there are two of you walking along, and you're in deep conversation as you walk. And you're not always looking where you're going, but it's all right because you're going slowly. There's too much laughter for this walking, I can tell. But we're into walking slowly. And so with all that in your heart and head, I'll invite you to sit down. But can you be thinking about this walking? There's a lovely picture of a road in our wilderness bit of Great Britain, which is a tiny thing compared to your huge country. It's right up in the Shetland Islands, which is just north of Scotland. A lonely road, a quiet road, not a busy road at all. It's not the freeways that you see around you. And St. Luke gives us a story of two people walking away from the big city, back home, back to where they know they're safe, where things might make sense again. But where they've been, nothing makes sense. And so they're on a journey trying to make some sense of what's happened in these last days. In fact, look up behind me. This is what's happened in the last days. But they weren't there to see it for themselves. They just heard other people talk about it. They heard people talking about an empty tomb and angels and seeing visions and hearing about their best friend who, as far as they're concerned, was dead, alive again. They could not make sense of it. And Luke says they were both disciples on a journey. Now, disciples come in all shapes and sizes. These two aren't even among the 12 that we know about. One's called Cleopas, and the other's not even named. And it's possible it's Cleopas's wife. It could be. It could be husband and wife. Or it could be two friends walking sadly, thinking about what's happened, trying to make sense. And then suddenly they sense another person walking beside them. This person doesn't barge in. This person doesn't interrupt them, just joins them. Isn't that gentle? And eventually he says, "What are you talking about?" Don't you know? The only person in Jerusalem that doesn't know what's happened? Our friend Jesus, the one we thought who would be king, who would kick out the Romans and take over. They took him and they crucified him and he died. But now some of the women, they've been to the tomb and they say he's not there anymore. It doesn't make sense. What's going on? And they poured out their hearts to a listening stranger. And then he said, didn't you realize what was going on? He said, slightly angrily maybe, but he just drew them on and said, don't you realize it was written? The Bible talks about it. The scriptures talk about it. It's there. He had to die. And he began unpacking the scriptures to them. He began unpacking the Bible stories, what the Psalms said, what Moses had prophesied, what Isaiah had written. It's all there, he said. And they listened to his gentle explanation as the scriptures unfolded. They were intrigued. And all this time they're walking. And he's walking with them. He's listening and talking to them. There's conversation going on. And actually the 7 miles back to their home soon is covered that way. They're there. And they arrive there hungry for food because it's a long journey. And their stranger doesn't invite himself to stay. He makes as if to go on. He doesn't barge in again, but they say, oh no, come on, come and join us. Have a meal with us. Stay with us. We want you in our home. And he responds to their invitation. And the stranger goes in. They hadn't recognized the stranger. I wonder why. They didn't know who he was. I wonder why. But in the home, in Cleopas's home, suddenly the stranger becomes the host at the table. And in his wife's home, or his friend's home, it's this stranger who breaks bread. No words, just breaks bread. And they suddenly realize who he is. He hasn't said anything. They just see the bread broken. And at that very moment, where is he? He's not here. But we knew it was him. We knew it was our friend Jesus. And their hearts had burned inside them, it says. That's a wonderful phrase. As they'd listened to him on the journey. As he had gently and patiently waited and walked with them. But it changes them. They can't sit still. They can't stay any longer in Emmaus. It's dark, but they get up, they leave the table, and this is where the running comes in, they're running back. The slow shuffle down to Emmaus comes a rapid run back to Jerusalem, where they discover that others have met the stranger too. And of course, it's their friend Jesus. But it was a slow realization on a journey, in a conversation, and at the end, no words at all that revealed Jesus to them. I think Luke put that story there with a lot of purpose, don't you? And maybe, just maybe it will help us exploring meeting Jesus in messy church.
Thank you, Martin. So just in the space left by a gospel story like that, either on your own, if you like to process things yourself, or with the person next to you, just take a moment and answer this question. What is there in the story of Emmaus that resonates with the way you share faith in your messy church?
It would be really good just to hear 1 or 2 words from you, if possible. I've got a microphone. I will use it. And if there's just a key word that might help us connect that story, because I think it has a lot of connections personally, and we've talked a lot about it, Lucy and I, with the talking about God and the encountering Jesus in messy church. So just indicate with a hand, and then I know I'm going off camera for the moment, but I will call out the answers. Words like. Lots to build on there, Lucy.
We have this challenge which Martin alluded to in the first talk, which people say, messy church is all very well, but what about the teaching? how can you teach when you only have a 15-minute celebration? What about the biblical teaching in that? And we always say, as Martin said before, yes, there is only a very short space for teaching, but there's 2 hours of learning happening and trying to explore and understand and own the ways that Jesus meets us way, way, way beyond me telling you a gospel story is phenomenal. And all those things that you've mentioned now are so vital to the Messy Church story. We picked out 6 of them as kind of just thoughts. I picked this before we travelled. I was preparing the PowerPoints, and as it turned out, it was the Messy Church that meets where we were in Los Angeles last week, which is rather lovely. Yeah, being on a journey. Somebody mentioned this, journeying with, and how important that is. These were 2 disciples on a journey, and how interesting that Jesus came and met them on a journey. And it was that walking alongside them as they moved on. And I know it's a cliche that discipleship is often described as a journey or a pilgrimage, but there is that really profound thing that when we are on the move, that's where God meets us. And for those 2 disciples, that was true. And I think for the Messy Church families, this is true, that as soon as they, I'd say, as soon as they walk through the doors, they are on a journey with God. I suspect my vision is going to be expanded to say God has had them on a journey from way beyond the time they walk through our doors. But those people are on a journey of discipleship, and they are meeting with God through that journey in their time at Messy Church. So just the fact that they have come against all the odds to your church to encounter God for 2 hours, that's a huge part of the way that they're going to meet God and the way that God is graciously going to come and encounter them. The togetherness, somebody mentioned this, the idea of community. This is huge in Messy Church, this idea that we come together, we walk together as a community. And some of the things that we've learnt in our Messy Church have been not about my discipleship, but about our discipleship as a community. Something about this togetherness speaks very, very strongly of Christ. And I think it's a part of Messy Church that we lose at our peril, because what we're doing is doing everything in our power to bring people together. And Jesus himself said, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I will meet with them. And there's something about coming together that gives, does it sound really trivial to say that gives God the best chance of turning up? It seems to be how he chooses to work so often, that it's with groups of people wanting to meet him. Not just individuals, but groups. And that's why we try and have loads of, we set up the room, not in rows like this, where you can only actually talk to the people next to you, and you can't even really talk to the person behind you without creaking your neck. But instead, everything is about bringing people together. And that, to a lonely and isolated world, where people, one of the biggest problems we have in the UK at the moment is isolation. Older people who don't meet folk from one end of the week to the next. Younger people who, with all the technology in the world, feel on their own and unable to cope. What we're doing is we are speaking of who God is and the kingdom of heaven by coming together, that community. And this idea that somebody mentioned again, the emotions, the moment of crisis, the real places that are faced by life. This is where God works so often. And in our Messy Churches, we need to keep an eye open for the people who are going through some sort of crisis, whatever that might be. And it's the huge privilege of Messy Church, because we have an hour to chat with people as they're doing the activities. We hear those stories. I remember one Messy Church that just took me aback. I remember exactly where I was, and it was the story of Moses crossing the Reed Sea, and I was doing something involving pinning fishes to a sort of cloth that was representing the sea. And as the little boy was doing it, his mum came up to me and just stood next to me, and we were watching the youngsters together. And she said, "Oh, I think I need to tell you." She said, I don't know if you know, but I've been struggling with alcohol for the last few years, and it's been a real problem, and I'm just at the point where I want to sort it out." And that was in the middle of the chaos and noise and energy of a Messy Church. Just this little moment of a really significant time for somebody. And Christ was in that moment. Christ was meeting her and making her able to share that with me at the Messy Church. What a privilege to be alongside people and to see God at work in their lives in these quiet, different ways.
We also noted, as we reflected on this, Lucy and I, that Jesus opened up the story with them. Yes, he opened up the Bible, in effect. Didn't you realize? It's there, it's all written there. And he gently went through stuff they knew. He unpacked it. He brought the story of God alongside their story. And those meeting of stories is at the heart of Messy Church. We have our story, God's story, their story, and we're allowing those stories to interact and inform each other. So actually, a slight aside on this, some people have said, the danger of Messy Church is you just stick to the safe stories. I hope you don't, because we need to look at the whole story. And it includes some of the difficult stories, some of those Old Testament stories that make us think and wonder. Don't just stick at the safe Sunday school stories. These are stories that will help us explore who we are, who God is, who people are. It goes deeper than that. And even the epistles, we've had some flack on this from Get Messy, that we've included some epistle pieces to explore as well. But actually, I was talking with Neil, he's somewhere here probably, and they did the cornerstone story, which is a piece from Ephesians about Christ being the cornerstone. But actually, it enabled everyone there to hold on to the bricks they'd made and think hard, I wonder, what is the cornerstone of my life? Christians believe that Jesus can be a cornerstone. And it was a very great moment of committal and discipleship as they used those stories. So the whole scripture, the whole of God's story, speaking into our story, speaking into their story, is part of this journey as well. The breaking of bread moment. The non-verbal action moment. Okay, it's been prepared for with all the conversation on the way, but in the end it's a moment of silence where they encounter, where they meet with God. And this is a mystery moment, isn't it? This is the bit that the Lord left with us to remember him by, but it's such a simple thing. Was it perhaps the way that he broke the bread that helped them see that it was Jesus? Who knows? There's works of art that give us ideas and clues. Was it because his sleeves fell down and they saw the marks in the wrists? I don't know. But it was a moment of non-verbal awareness that this was Jesus. And there are lots of those non-verbal moments in Messy Church, which are surrounded by words and chat and conversation. But then there's a silent moment when people just get it and just see it and just discover God for themselves. Looks a noisy table there, But in the middle of all that, in the celebration time particularly, or when we've done communion in Messy Church, I was talking with some of the delegates here and they're thinking of it or are wondering about it. It is a precious part. Actually, the meal is quite a sacramental moment anyway in Messy Church. So to add the communion bit, there may be issues with your denomination about that. It's worth exploring, but it is a moment of encountering God. And that leaves us a lot. It is encounter. These are interesting. Lucy's used these in her Messy Church, they're little beads. Can you see there's some doves on there? And as part of the communion, they pass the beads to each other. It was passing the peace. A very physical act of passing. Not lots of words, but the passing of this symbol of sharing peace was a way in which they met with God in each other. Someone said, meeting with God in each other. It was that your very first thing you said. And that was a moment of meeting God in Messy Church. So encounter. They were just some of the reflections that we drew out. You had lots more, in fact. We think this is a story that says a lot about how we talk about and meet with Jesus in Messy Church.
Just to be clear.
Sorry.
Some of you might be worried that I was passing around glass beads when there were small children present who would obviously want to put them in their mouths. This was actually at the Liturgical Commission communion service, and it was very fascinating to see them passing these round. And, and at one point, one of them had a mild panic because he'd passed his bead on to somebody else, the peace of the Lord be with you, and they hadn't given him a piece back, and he was left peaceless. And what was he to do with the person approaching him? It was. But he said that was a really profound moment. Anyway, just in case anyone was anxious. So this, how do we learn? How do people encounter God? How do we hear the word of God? As Martin says, it's not just about the way we talk. It's about all the non-verbal messages that go on in Messy Church as well. And anyone who's been involved in education will know how important the non-verbal stuff is. I explained about our relationship with dear George Lings earlier on, and he's continued to be a kind of godfather to Messy Church as we've gone on. Sadly, he's gone and retired. I mean, how inconsiderate can you get? But will continue to be a friend of ours, I'm sure. And we went a few years later to chat to him and his team about discipleship in Messy Church. And we said, everybody's nagging us about discipleship and how do we move people on? And one of the tools that he and his team described to us was this triangle, which I'll talk it through. You might be familiar with it, but it's basically saying there are lots of different ways of learning. And in the church, traditionally, we've kind of, in the Enlightenment church, we've favoured formal learning, so sermons and Bible studies and self-study, reading on your own and that sort of thing, listening to sermons on YouTube and following talks and speakers and so on. And the formal learning is really important. It's a vital part of our discipleship. As you can see from the way it's an equilateral triangle. They're all important. Formal learning is important, and there is a certain amount of that in Messy Church. We deal with some pretty heavy stories sometimes, dealing with Jesus saying, I'm going ahead of you to prepare a room. That's quite heavy. Easter, that's quite a heavy story. So we do the formal learning to some extent in that gathering. But what George was trying to get across to us was that the other forms of learning, although they're not celebrated as much in the church, they are equally important to a whole life discipleship. And he describes them as non-formal learning and social learning. Non-formal learning is your kind of apprenticeship, if you like. So if you were learning to, if you wanted to be a plumber, is that the right word? Do you have plumbers in Canada? Oh, good. Oh, so just a minor sort of cultural point. I should say, do you call them plumbers? Because obviously you have plumbers. Anyway, if you wanted to be a plumber, you would go and work with somebody who knew how to deal with a toilet, and you would watch them, and then you would join in with them, and then they would give you some spanners and do whatever you do with spanners and a toilet, I don't know. But and then when you'd learnt enough and could be trusted, you would be left to do it on your own, and maybe one day become a qualified plumber and then have an apprentice of your own. And so you would learn how to be a plumber by watching, doing alongside, walking with this other plumber. And George was just explaining discipleship in those terms, which I think is very apposite. That's how it works. People see you and the way that you are at a messy church, and they copy you, which is a little bit scary to think that people are imitating us. But that's how Paul made disciples. You know, imitate me as I imitate Christ, he said. It's a huge responsibility, but that's how discipleship works. So imagine your kitchen team at a messy church, and, say somebody on the fringe says, oh, I'm quite good at cooking, I'd love to help out in the kitchen. They've got the cooking skills already, but perhaps by spending that hour or so with the kitchen team, maybe they see how that team works together. And they notice whether that team is flinging frying pans across the kitchen and swearing at each other to get the meal on the table, or whether there's laughter and love and cooperation and helping each other out. It's apprenticeship stuff. And the final bit of this learning, how we learn, how we encounter God, is something about just what you learn by taking in the environment. What you learn without even noticing. So Martin and I in Toronto learned a little bit about how to be Canadian by watching what everybody else did. And we didn't know how to cross the road, so we spent a lot of time watching other people and then doing that kind of manic sprint. As soon as the little white man appears, we were legging it across the road with everyone else. And this happens so much in messy church that people learn and encounter God without even realizing it. One example is of a messy church up in the north of England in a very, very deprived estate. And the messy church leader was having a drink with the mums who came to her messy church, and the leader's child spilt his drink. And Alison said, oh dear, let's clear it up. As you would, as I would. And apparently the mums looked at her and said, ooh, isn't she lovely? Isn't she great? Isn't she calm? She didn't swear at him. She didn't slap him. Isn't she lovely? And Alison didn't quite know what to make of this, because on the one hand, it could just have been a moment. She wasn't setting out to do a parenting course. She was just doing what she did out of who she was. On the other hand, was that a moment that actually modelled parenting for this group of mums? So that maybe when they went home and their kids spilt their drink, maybe they wouldn't get a slap and a swear word as they had done because their mum had done it to them. Maybe it had broken a vicious cycle. And maybe when those kids grow up, they would have a slightly more positive way of parenting. Just by living out the kingdom in front of each other, we can communicate so much. I love the way that Messy Church is just a learning environment, an encounter environment, just by what it is, a sort of prophetic environment, really. We were doing a Messy Church holiday club, a vacation Bible school for the whole family at Portsmouth Cathedral. And both of us were there. And there was a rather stroppy lady on the team who she was cathedral, and she didn't really do Messy Church. She didn't really approve. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Stroppy is kind of grumpy and a bit kind of what would it be? Sort of stuffy and grumpy and kind of negative about everything. Sorry.
Your
yes.
face tells it all.
And she was kind of keeping her distance from everything and she was on the team until the third day. And at the team meeting on the third day, she said, well, I have to say it, she said. I've been bringing my granddaughter, who's 8, for the last 3 days. And I had no idea what was going on. But last night, I was asking her about Holiday Club, and she told me everything that she'd learnt. She has learnt everything that we've covered. And we were covering about 10 stories about Jesus in each day. So this child had picked up 20 stories about Jesus in the last 2 days. And the lady was just blown away by how much her granddaughter had picked up just by being in that messy church environment. So there is a whole lot of learning going on without us having to bust a gut to have the great way to tell the Bible story every time, or to have exactly the right words to say over each activity, or to have the perfect person leading the celebration every time. God is working in the space that you've made in Messy Church. What a glorious thing. Just like on that Emmaus Road, Jesus steps alongside us and works in that space.
This is hot off the press. We have done it 2 years running now, and we've sent out some surveys online to Messy Churches. Some of them have been to the leaders, to the regional coordinators, and others for the families in the Messy Churches. Now, obviously, it's a self-selecting sample, but we have quite a lot of results. And we were looking at just what their attitudes to Messy Church was, to learning, to their interest in the faith, to their wanting to know more. And we've been quite amazed by the feedback from these surveys. Just a few stats here to look at. There were actually 269 responses altogether. It's quite a lot. These are to the families, these are. And the question was, how likely are you to recommend Messy Church to your friends and family? Hugely. A large number of people want to pass on the story. The evangelism is happening in Messy Church. The families want to bring other families. 200 out of the 269 want to do that, which is an amazing thing. Would you say Messy Church is a comfortable place in which to discuss your beliefs and doubts? Well, you can see just about a third of the family said, yeah, we like talking about God stuff. I think we underestimate that people do want to do spiritual conversation. They want to do it in a safe place, a safe environment, but they want to talk about big questions. They want to talk about what happens when you die. They want to talk about all those big questions. Do you enjoy, this was a great one, wasn't it? Do you enjoy praying, singing, and reading the Bible stories? Whoa! Can you see? It's about 80%. I said 80, 81, just about, yeah, just under. 81%, that's right. They enjoy the celebrations. There has been a feeling that somehow, we're making them do the celebration. They don't want to stay for that really. We'll engineer it that somehow it's very quick and we won't say too much about God and all that stuff. No! They want to hear the story. They want to hear what we believe. And they want to put their own thoughts about it alongside that. They want to listen. And do you take part in the prayers and songs and listen to the story of the Messy Church? It's even bigger figure, 97%. They do want to be involved. We found this quite amazing I know it's a small sample, but it gives some idea of what's going on. And do you think you'll still be coming to Messy Church in 5 to 10 years? Well, obviously they're looking ahead and making a guess there, but people are saying, we want to keep coming. We want to be there. Something about the way in which the new wineskin of church we're creating is attractive, and it is a place where they feel at home. And this is something which, again, there are a few saying no, of course, but look at that, almost half the families. Oh, this is a different one. So would you, jumping ahead of me there.
Sorry.
And do you think you will still be coming? Yeah, and going back, next one was, would you like to find out more about Jesus? Now, isn't this interesting? There's a hunger, like in that story. They got hungry, literally, by the time they got to Emmaus, but there was a deeper hunger that was ignited inside them, wasn't there? They wanted to find out more about this stranger and how he was understanding that what happened to Jesus was in the Bible, and they want to find out more. So this is a huge validation. So there's some findings here that have implications.
It would be lovely to sit down and have a day with you to unpack this a bit. Let me read through this sort of summary from the families. What do these findings say to you about messy evangelism? And as Martin said, I don't know about you, but I kind of have this little voice inside me that says, oh, people just want to come and eat sausages. They don't want to hear about God. I'm forcing God on them, and they don't want to hear. But what do these findings tell us from our families? All right, the switched-on families who've taken the time to fill in a survey, but what does it tell us? 1/3 of families belong to no other church except Messy Church. So 1/3 of the families coming to their Messy churches belong to no other church. This is the only church they're coming to that month. Oh, what responsibility does that give us? 2/3 of people hear about Messy Church by either a poster or a personal invitation. So what does that say to us about the importance of our publicity? We'll come on to that later. 2/3 of people are in a comfy space to discuss beliefs and doubts. 2/3 of the people feel that they're happy, they're safe, they're in a safe place to discuss these things. 9 out of 10 enjoy worship. That's very funny. 2/3...
Should we ask Sunday Church that question?
No,
sorry.
2/3 expect to be with you for the next 5 to 10 years. So do you have to deliver the whole gospel this month in its entirety with everything kept in? Maybe the answer is yes. But if they're expecting to be with you that long, I wonder. And half want to know more about Jesus. So for every 2 people coming to your table to glue googly eyes on things, one of those people would love to hear more about Jesus. I think that's quite mind-blowing, personally. I wish we had more time to unpack it, but we mustn't indulge, because we have... Oh, look, Martin, we've only got a quarter of an hour.
I know.
Right, okay. The practicalities. Right, we're going to gallop through these aspects of Messy Church, because, the big thoughts are really, really interesting, and you're the sort of people who like the big stuff as well as the down-to-earth stuff. But this is really important. And we're thinking about, okay, you've told us about triangles, you've told us about survey results, yeah, we get all that. But what about when I'm in my Messy Church, how do I talk to people about God? That's what we're interested in. So what we thought we'd do is have a really quick gallop in the last quarter of an hour through these aspects of Messy Church and just think, how do I talk about God? How do I allow God to speak for himself in these different zones of Messy Church? The publicity, the welcome tables, the activity tables, the celebration bit, and the meal table. So, I think I'm kicking off, aren't I?
I think so.
Yes. Now, you probably can't read this from the back, but I'll read it out for you anyway. Here we go. This is the publicity. And do you remember we said that most people hear about Messy Church either by a personal invitation or because of a flyer or a poster that they've seen? All right.
They're already reading it, it's all right.
Here's a sample poster for a Messy Church. Messy Church at St. Sploggett's Church. Wednesdays, 3:30 or Fridays, 5:30, some months. Location, church, school, village hall or other to be confirmed. Ring the minister for details. For families with children between the ages of 6 and 8, no unaccompanied children, no unaccompanied teenagers, no unaccompanied adults. Food fads will not be catered for. Bring your own food. Unacceptable behaviour will result in a request to leave.
Welcome!
It's a complete, actually no, it's not a complete exaggeration.
We have seen things a bit like this. Not as exaggerated, of course.
But I suppose what I'm trying to say is something along the lines of the message that you send out, however big you write welcome at the bottom of your poster, the welcome message is going to be completely lost in everything else, in all the other messages you're sending out. So even in your publicity, how can that be speaking of Christ to the people who are going to see that poster? That to me just says, you're very welcome on our terms. The power is with me, the organizer. You can come if you're going to behave yourselves. But frankly, there is no Christ in this. This is obfuscatory, and the door is basically shut in your face. So think about Christ in the publicity as well as everything else. And those are the stats, look. The yellow part, 37.4 people heard about Messy Church through a poster or advert. So a third of people come because of seeing some sort of publicity. That's significant. So let's get it right.
And then they arrive. And there's a registration table. How important the welcome is there. We all know of people. If they look like this at you, you don't feel very welcome. These were two people, I think, at Lucy's church who were play acting an unwelcoming welcome. But again, I've seen this, or finding it. There was no signage to find it. I've been to many. There's so many ways in which we speak of God just by the way we are hospitable from the very start. I had one very quick bit, Lucy. There's this Messy church I go to in North London where the welcome isn't just at the welcome table, it's in the street outside. Someone's out there welcoming people. Now, if you've got personnel for that, please do that, because it just is another invitational way in which people are being shown God right from the very start. So, welcome table, watch it. Yes.
The way you do your activity time, meeting Christ in the activity time. This is a little activity from Messy Hospitality, which is not a book plug at all, but it's a fabulous book. And here are three characters who are all Messy Church leaders. You may know people like this. And they've all been given the same task to do. Martin, would you mind galloping around with the microphone? Because
yes.
What we need is an Anthea, a Bertha, and a Kathy to read for us. And the activity that they're leading is they've been asked to make a skeleton out of... Now, in America, I had real problems with this word. Do you say pasta? Yes. Pasta. You see, wait, Roberta is pasta. I said it was pasta. They say... Pasta. Which apparently is the leader of a church. So who knew? So this activity is to make, it's on the theme of the body of Christ, being the body of Christ, and the activity is to make a skeleton out of pasta shapes, okay, glued to a piece of card. So I wonder if we could hear, if anyone's brave enough to just read through these short this is looking inside the mind of Anthea, Bertha, and then Kathy, to see what they're thinking about.
This is the task I've been given. It's my turn to be on the schedule. The minister will be pleased with me. I've got to get the children to make a skeleton out of pasta. They mustn't eat the pasta. It seems like a stupid activity to me, but I expect it's something about Jesus. I hope it doesn't make a mess. The main thing is to get the job done using as little pasta as possible so it doesn't cost the church much. Then, we need to get cleared up quickly and get home on time for once. I'll have some skeletons ready-made so that all they have to do is put their name on them. That way, they'll have a nicer thing to take home than if they do it themselves and make a mess of it.
So compare that with Bertha.
My activity this month is making pasta skeletons to teach the children the concept of the body of Christ from 1 Corinthians 12. I must make sure that they all know what book in the Bible this comes from. And I must teach them that it means Christians have to work together. In fact, I'll make them write, "We work together" on their skeleton so they remember the teaching point.
And Kathy.
I hope George's family comes again and gives me my activity a try. I wanted to find out if George won the basketball match he was talking about last time. I wonder if his mom's job prospects are any better. That family does so much sport and keep their bodies so healthy. I know they'll enjoy this theme. Now, Pat said how uncomfortable she feels about playing with food with people around the world who are starving. Oh, so I'll change it from pasta shapes to plastic straws. I wonder how Mike will feel about this image of the body when his grandpa might need a leg amputating because of his diabetes. He might have some really important insights into the passage I'll never thought of. Oh God, help me to know what to say when to shut up and listen.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So 3 very different approaches to exactly the same activity. And how do you actually work that? There's no mechanism that you can put to change somebody from doing what Anthea was doing, which is, I'm going to get this job done, I'm going to do it quickly, I'm going to clear up as quickly as I can and keep it as cheap and cheerful as possible. Get out of the way. Bertha, very controlling. I know what this passage means, and I am going to teach it to them. They are going to take it home, and I hope they learn that one thing about this passage. No openness at all. This is the only thing this passage means. And Kathy, who thinks about George and his basketball match, who thinks about George's mum and her job prospects, who thinks about Pat, who's worried about food shortage in the world, who thinks about the family where they might be going through some sort of amputation of Grandad's limbs because of his diabetes. And what does that mean for this passage? This is something about not the activity in Messy Church, but the way that we go about that activity. And that comes back over and over again, not to the mechanics of a Messy Church, but to have our team got a vibrant, lively discipleship. Are we all expecting to meet with God in these activities, or are we just like Anthea, just getting that job done and get out of there as quickly as possible? Where is Jesus in that?
I'm just going to leave some questions here. We're running short of time, but by the Lord's table, that's that moment of celebration where we all come together around a shared piece of worship together, a celebration together. But just ask those questions. Are we here entertaining, or are we here to meet with God? Is it too many words, or are we allowing, like in the Emmaus story, opportunities for non-verbal learning? The actions, are they prayer with actions? We've often been doing the Lord's Prayer with actions as part of this in many Messy churches. If we do give words, are they simple but beautiful phrases people can take away with them? Portable poetry has often been described. Some simple language that can go home. Like the Messy Grace, obviously, is already there from the scripture, but we can create new words that will help us. And are all the ages engaged? It's not just the children. In fact, quite a few of the children at the front here, aren't they, in this particular picture? But I would encourage as many of the adults to gather around together so that this is clearly for all and not just for a few at the front. And the communion saga, you've heard a bit from Lucy already about that. It's a growing thing, actually, in the UK, that more and more are using and including the sacrament of communion in a part of Messy Church. I hope that will be something you'll explore in Canada if you've not already done so as well, because there is an extra depth. When we did it at our Messy Church, we put it in the context of the Lord's Supper and doing activities together. We baked bread, we crushed grapes, we built a table, all those things. Then we brought the story together, and that gave it a context and understanding. And then we just invited people, if they wanted to take this bread as a way in which Christians remember that Jesus died for us. And we drank non-alcoholic wine. That wouldn't be true in some Messy churches. They actually do use alcoholic wine, but we use non-alcoholic wine. It added depth to what we did of encounter with God in the Messy Church. We just throw that out, and that's something to explore more, I think.
And what about the mealtime? Is that just tacked onto the end of our Messy Churches as, oh, it'll get them through the door, so let's feed them? Or is it just a social program that we're just, we've got hungry people in our neighbourhood, so let's give them a meal so they go home full? Those are good, that's fine. But is this another opportunity where we could actually make a space for God to be at work? And again, that's very little to do with the mechanics. There's a little bit, like when we did our Messy Church for a start, we found that our team was holding back and serving people so that when it came time for them to sit down, they ended up sitting on a table separately, all on their own. So we ended up saying, right, half the team, you're going to sit down straight away, scatter yourselves around the tables so that we've got as much chance to talk to the families coming as possible. And things like that are important. But are we going and sitting at those tables knowing that we are Christ to the stranger and the stranger is Christ to us? Are we sitting at the table in Emmaus? Or are we just shoveling pasta down people's necks? What are we doing?
We're going back to our image, our story, our journey. And rather as we did in the first session, Lucy's put together, and we've helped put together some words that might help us to commit ourselves to meeting God, meeting the people in Messy Church, helping them to encounter God for themselves. So in the same way as before, please stay seated because people at the back won't see otherwise. We invite you, if you'd like to make a commitment to allow this to happen in your Messy Church or the Messy Church you're thinking about starting. And I'll read the first words that link back to the story, and then Lucy will ask the question. And if you want to, join in with a "we will" as a piece of shared commitment. Jesus walked alongside his 2 disciples and listened to their messy problems with a generous heart.
Will you, like him, walk beside your messy families and make space for them to voice their needs?
We will. Jesus paused at the doorway of the house in Emmaus.
Will you, like him, wait patiently at the threshold of people's lives until they're ready, even desperate, to invite Christ in?
We will. Jesus sat and broke bread with his disciples.
Will you, like them, keep on sitting at Christ's table so that you keep on growing closer to him yourself?
We will. Jesus revealed who he was at just the right moment.
Will you, like God's people through the ages, patiently watch for the perfect timing of God's Holy Spirit in your own life, in the life of the church, and in the life of those around you?
We will.
May the Christ who walks with us, laughs with us, and shows us the truth turn our lives upside down today, so that our miserable plod becomes a joyful gallop to take good news to a world in need of love and life and laughter.
Amen.
Amen.